Mr. Eline, where did the idea for the 4th of July Circus Parade originate? Where did it begin?
Well, I think it began with Chappie Fox of the Circus Parade Museum, or the World Museum, and he brought it first to Ben Barkin, and then Ben in turn brought it to me, and we decided that it'd be a great amalgamation to put on the parade in Milwaukee.
What do you think appeals to people in a circus parade like this? The crowds have been larger every year, and yet the circuses themselves, where they have played, are still successful, but they've had more difficulty in past years drawing crowds. What do you think accounts for the success in that light of the circus parade?
Oh, I would think that the nostalgia of the old-time parade certainly has stayed with the older generation, and I think they've passed it to the younger ones. And then the real pageantry of the teams of horses and the color and so on is a drawer for people of all ages, I think.
Do you have personal recollections as a young man or a very young man of circus life?
Well, yes, I remember going to some of the parades, which I suppose dates me pretty well, but I remember when I was between 6 and 10 years old, I saw a number of parades that my family took me to here in Milwaukee.
How do you assess the cultural life in the Milwaukee community? How do you personally assess it?
Well, I think that we had a great cultural life several decades ago. Probably we let it slip away to some degree, but certainly there's a rebirth, a regeneration in the past half dozen years, or perhaps the past decade, which pleases me very much, and I know pleases many people in Milwaukee.
What kind of a personal kick do you get out of being involved as you are, to the extent that you are, in this cultural rejuvenation?
Well, personal kick, I don't know, but I think that it's a wonderful thing for the city and the state to have the symphony orchestra and to have some of these cultural events coming in, and now with the music hall being built, why, we'll have a place to put many of these cultural events during the colder winter months when we can't go to the outdoor band shells and that sort of thing. So I think in the overall that we're really building something.
You think the community responds as a community with an enthusiasm equal to the leadership that's being shown now?
Well, I think the community in general has responded very well, and I'm quite pleased with the feeling in general and in all walks of life. And many of these people have written letters and have contacted me personally, so even I know that there's a feeling for some of these things.
Questions?
Gentlemen, you have both performed so extensively in our so-called cultural centers, the East and West Coast. Do you feel that our cultural life, at least in the area of music, is becoming, or is still confined too much to these centers? Mr. Bernstein, would you like to take a crack at it first?
By centers, you mean the great metropolises, or do you mean the new cultural centers that are being built in them?
I mean the metropolises, yes.
No, as a matter of fact, there's tremendous diversity taking place. Diversification, I should say, because it's in the process of happening. But there has been a tremendous spread away from the metropolises to smaller cities, to university campuses, communities of various sorts and sizes. It's, popularly referred to as the cultural explosion, which is a word that occasions some dismay among the higher brow critics. But it's a thing that I am very proud of and happy to see happening, because it's not a fake explosion, it's a real one. And it's penetrating everywhere in the country.
Mr. Ellington, how do you feel on the same point?
Well, I just am very happy to know that the American audience is maturing.
And maturing, you feel, across the country?
Oh, yes, definitely.
What evidence do you find in your concerts of this?
Of this? Well, ours is a rather separate one. It's in that, everybody gets their own audience, more or less. And, of course, ours is spread over a long period. We find people who met when we were playing Mood Indigo at a prom, or the baby was born when Caravan came out, or Don't Get Around Much Anymore. They were seeing Husband Off to War or something like that. And we cover a lot of different generations, And so it's, you just sort of automatically have an appraisal of the scene.
But wouldn't you say, Duke, that one of the great signs of this explosion I was talking about is that we really share the same audiences to a much greater extent than we used to? I mean, as you say, you have your own audience. Well, that used to be true, and I suppose our kind of music, if you could say such a thing, used to have its own audience. But now you can't tell them apart anymore. I mean, the same kids and the same excited people come to hear you as come to hear me. And that's, that's something new.
What I have... I've been trying to, in talking of saying, trying to decategorize this it's American music, I would say, or the stuff that we're in anyway. And it's getting to the point now where the modern contemporary composer and the guy who's supposed to be a modern jazz composer, they all come out of the same conservatories. And,
exactly.
And it's very difficult to find a place to draw the line.
Well, you were certainly one of the pioneers in that.
Oh, yeah, but I didn't come out of the conservatory.
No, but you were one of the first people who wrote so-called symphonic jazz.
I had a conservatory in the Capitol Theater.
That's right, exactly.
Sit there and listen to the symphony before the picture.
Well, maybe that's really the difference between us, that you wrote symphonic jazz and I wrote jazz symphonies. Something like that.
Being financed, do you think there'll ever be the day when they will be as well financed and well accepted financially, shall we say, as a long-haired fellow who can plink on a guitar?
Well, it's funny that you use the word long-haired in that connection now. How times have changed. Huh? It's true. I mean, only a few years ago, long hair meant exactly the opposite. And now it means the plinking on a guitar. In answer to your question, I would say that music, concert music, can never really pay for itself. It's just built that way. It's part of the organism. But it is paying for itself more and more as time goes on, and the increase will be very much more evident when more subsidization is evident. And that is, as you know, beginning in a big way now on a state level, on a federal level for the first time, I'm very happy to say, and on a local, municipal level as well. Besides which, there's much more interest on the part of foundations and great industrial complexes like Schlitz. And I think before long we're going to see a time when music will not be a losing proposition. which it always has been by nature. I don't think it'll ever make money. That's not what it's there for.
How do you feel about rock and roll as an art form?
Well, I don't know what the word art form means anymore, and particularly in connection with rock and roll. As a matter of fact, rock and roll is even an outdated expression now. Nobody talks about pop music now as rock and roll. That's last year, 2 years ago. It died with the word twist. Nobody twists anymore. I mean, you frug or whatever. But whatever you call it, I've got to confess that I'm a rabid fan of it when it's good, which is about, I suppose, 5% of the time. 95% of the time, it's awful because it's turned out by the yard and it's not very inventive. But that's true of serious music, too. I mean, I should think that 5% of, only 5%, and that's a pretty big estimate, of the serious music that gets written is really good. But that 5% in pop music is so good right now, this moment that you ask this question, that I feel right now more pleasure in listening to, for example, Simon and Garfunkel, or the Association singing Along Comes Mary, or whatever, than almost anything being written by the avant-garde community of composers anywhere in the world today. It sounds like a shocking statement for a serious musician to make, but that's the way I feel at this moment. I get much more of a boot out of Painted Black than I do out of, well, I don't want to mention any names, but you know who I mean, I'm sure.
Is this just the vitality that inspires you so?
Yes, there is a real atmosphere of freshness and energy and experimentation in the true sense of experimentation. I mean, they're really, the thing dies after a week or two. It's on the charts, let's say, for a couple of weeks or a month, and then it's gone forever. But while it's there, it has a nowness, how can I say it? It really is of this minute so intensely.
Mr. Ellington, what's the relationship, and this is an important element as I understand it, of jazz, between the spontaneity of improvisation on the one hand and composed jazz music on the other?
Well, you see, from my point of view, it's rather unique because I'm writing for the same guys since 1927, 28, 29, 32, and on up. And you have the same people, the same tonal personalities. And when you write a note for Johnny Hodges, the same note for somebody else has a different value. It has a different weight, a different timbre. And this, of course, makes it entirely different. It's not like you're writing for, say, for instance, a clarinet, and then you don't know who's going to play the clarinet. And this is our thing. It's writing for these guys, I guess.
Do you think jazz loses vitality when it's put down on paper, on the charts, so to speak?
Well, it all depends upon what they put on the paper, and depends on who's reading it. You see, there are a lot of things that are not really as precise as they seem to be, but they are accepted in the jazz world. But the same arranger, when he gets to write for a symphony orchestra, he will learn that the symphony man plays exactly what he puts on the paper. And there are certain little compromises, you know, that have to be made because, for instance, there's certain syncopations, for instance. This is where I think they get into the most trouble.
I don't think it's exactly as you said, if you'll excuse me, Duke, for taking issue. It's a matter of degree, certainly, because in what is known as serious music, it's supposed to be an exact science and written down as exactly as possible, but it can't be completely exact. Otherwise, how do you account for no two performances sounding alike ever? Even in the most serious and most classical kind of music there is a certain amount of musicality that can't be written down. That has to be left to the performer to interpret, and that's how interpretation is born.
Is that in solo?
But in solo, and even
in ensemble, too?
In ensemble. And that's where the conductor comes in and tries to make it uniform.
Yeah.
But in jazz, this leeway is much greater. It's a matter of degree, but it still exists in both kinds of music. It's just that what has to be written down in jazz is harder to write down.
It's the understanding or the agreement that's made with the people in this particular ensemble that is going to play. For instance, you know, I mean, you say you write something and a set of quarter triplets or something like that, and the saxophone for the saxophone section, and they agree on whether it's going to be da 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 or boom boom boom, you know, whether they're going to add that blow in it. That's the difference. They do those kind of things where they don't do it in the symphony. You know, they don't.
And also, you have vague marks like squiggles and the word smear and so on, which means something to the player.
Yeah, they're very technical.
Which Mozart didn't use. But you will agree it's a matter of degree only, huh?
Yeah, I suppose so. I think it's it's a matter of using a different language. Like, well, I can't think of anything at the moment. You know, like that, something like that.
I know exactly
where the preference of triplets over
square notes.
Eighth notes.
Yeah.
You know, huh?
Of a square eighth notes.
Yeah. And they seem to get a different idea of syncopation, and it's the slightest little degree of where the anticipation, as accepted in the jazz world, is an eighth note. You know, and it's not an eighth.
But it can't be precisely that. And
no, but it's a matter of agreement, I think.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But usually it's unspoken, isn't it? You don't even have to talk about it.
No, because they say, well, you know, it's like...
I mean, if you have 4 quarter notes in a row, you'll probably play ba, 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 da. I mean, instead of ba, ba, ba right on the beat. But there's something you feel. The prototype that you mentioned, which is, I suppose, the Toscanini, the Kusevitsky, the Bruno Walter, the people who are dedicated to their traditions and even to that segment of serious music which they are proficient in and which they know, so that it isn't even only all classical music, but even further delimited by their own tastes and traditions. But those great figures of classical music don't really exist anymore. There are some, but they're the last of a line, and the new generations of conductors are much more broad, liberal, progressive, interested, informal.
With what responsibility do you feel that you have to bring classical music to the masses?
I wouldn't use the word responsibility because that implies an ought, a categorical imperative of some moral sort. It's not a moral matter. A musician is automatically, a performing musician is automatically somebody who is dedicated to playing music for people. And the deeper the level at which they hear what he's doing, the greater satisfaction he has, right? And also, the more people he can bring it to, the greater satisfaction he has.
The theory teachers tend to say that we've been in a 60-year transition ever since Stravinsky and have never really found ourselves as the composers did, say, during the classical and romantic periods. Do you see it this way? Are we in a long period of transition searching for something, or have we found it?
Exactly that way. No, I don't think we've found it. I think that, I wouldn't say 60 years, but 50. I would say since, really, the First War. We've been in a very critical period, musically, which has seen the last of the great romanticists and the composers who had the 19th century concept of what music ought to be. In their stead, we have a great deal of rebellion for its own sake, the much trumpeted death of tonality, which of course is at the base of the whole thing. And we have not quite recovered from that shock yet. I think that the transition period will eventually result in our finding a new way of dealing with tonality. We have to rediscover tonality again, because I don't think music can live without it. And I think when we do, it will have new wrinkles. We will discover it from a new point of view. We won't be trammeled by the old harmonic concepts, but we will rediscover it.
Mr. Ellington, to what extent have the classical masters contributed to or influenced your music?
Well, when I used to have a six-piece band, all of the movie houses in Broadway used to have symphony orchestras in them. And we used to go in the afternoon and listen to the symphony orchestra, and then go to work and try to make our six pieces sound like the symphony orchestra. No success, but a lot of fun. You know? And of course, music is something that the first thing that you learn about music is it's something to listen to. And I think that's the biggest thrill there is in music, and listening to it. Writing it is great, and but there's nothing like listening to music.
You once told an interviewer that you were very responsive to the music, I believe, of Respighi. Is that true? Of Respighi, the, I believe, Italian composer.
Yeah, well, I don't really know any composer who hasn't done something that I like. I mean, I really enjoy everything that everybody has done.
How does this find its way into your music? Do composers borrow ideas from each other?
Well, it has been said that composers do borrow ideas, but I think in some instances that if you admire somebody's work, you absorb a certain amount of it. And if you go away from it and you don't come back for a year, it's liable to seep out in whatever you're writing.
So much for the influence of compositional music and so-called serious music and performed music on your work. What about folk music and basic spontaneous American jazz itself? What part does this play? How have you designed what you have done along these lines, or how have you followed that inspiration?
Well, I think spontaneity has its limitations. I think it's very much exaggerated. I think there is very little spontaneity. You must take into account the fact that a man plays a great solo, and the audience likes it so well, he does it again. Well, I think the second time he does it, it's an orchestration. You don't know. Not that it was his idea, but Coleman Hawkins, for instance, in his record of Body and Soul. Well, Coleman made the record, and everybody on the street was humming it. So he came to New York to play. And somebody says, play Body and Soul. Well, all right, Coleman's a great musician, and so naturally his first obligation is to his own mind. So he goes on to improvise and entertain himself. And they say, well, wait, baby, that's not Body and Soul, because that's not what you played on the record. So now this guy has been hung with that for 20-some years, with that same solo. And if he plays anything else, it varies from that one solo, But it was one of the great ad-lib solos.
In other words,
the first time he did it.
A very important thing in music, then, isn't it?
Well, yes. And I don't know whether this qualifies my thing about spontaneity, but spontaneity is this spontaneous, that if it's worth listening to, it has to be anticipated. I've never heard anybody play anything that wasn't anticipated, no matter whether it's 4 bars ahead or 1 beat ahead. And so this limits the spontaneity of it.
Are you saying then that in jazz the performer is, in a sense, composer?
Well, no, what he's going to play is various phrases, one behind the other, of varying lengths. And no, I don't think that's right. I mean, he's given a format, a harmonic format, and a rhythmic chart to follow, and it's a matter of what he's going to inject into it. So if he's ad-libbing and he plays Yankee Doodle, he's not really composing. If he plays Swanee River, he's not composing.
But
I don't want to be partial.
But the performance is still his own creation. Well, don't worry about the partiality. What do people respond to most enthusiastically in your concerts? What do they like to hear most?
Well, our concerts, we try to approach from, I think, a rather special angle, and that is that the first thing is the premise is to present these extraordinary instrumentalists in their solo responsibilities. They, half of them are internationally celebrated, and if you've got them, and we know that people want to hear them, so this is the first responsibility, to present them. So things have to be written to have to be written, that have fitting background or a fitting framework to present these people in character. And then, of course, we have our image. You see, when I say our image, it means it isn't a normal editorial our or we. I mean, because we've got guys who've been there since the beginning. Harry Connick came with me in 1927, Johnny Hodges 28, Cootie Williams 29, Lawrence Brown 32, Strayhorn 39, Jimmy Hamilton 43, Cat Anderson 45, Procope 40, Cat Anderson 44, Procope 45, Paul Gonsalves 1950, Sam Woodyard 1954. See, now he's a new man. He came what, 1954 is how many years ago? That's 12 years ago. He's a new man. Well, this is probably older than all the bands who are active, and it's an entirely different perspective from which we approach our responsibility.
There are new things all the time, then.
Oh, yeah, well, you have to not only keep your own mind active, you got to entertain the guys who are doing the blowing, because you don't want them to blow without any inspiration, or it's like they're bored or something. So you have to create things from all of them. But when you make certain types of appearances, you come around, and a lot of the people want to hear what these people are identified with, some over a period of many years. Right now, Johnny Hodges, for instance, is being, they get a kick out of hearing you, so I say, an echo from the 40s, Well, 40s was a great period, and this is the spot he filled. Now, La Plus Belle Africaine was written the 1st of January, And we cover the first thing we play on the program, Black and Tan Fantasy, Creole Love Calling the Mooch, that's 1927 and 28. And everything in it has, it's strongly contrasted, and we hope it's routine with proper dramatic effect and so forth. And of course, there's the medley, which says now the history of Ellington goes like this. Now we hope that this is instructive as well as entertaining. Oh, there's one thing. Please tell all of your lovely listeners that we do love them madly.